Already the 19th day of June 2020. Man, the year is just flying by. It is the Insight program for this Friday morning from AM 1450 WDLB. Mike Warren sitting in for Jeff Cannon on the program with the chairman of the board.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me. And as the show is called Insight, I hope we can provide a little on some of those issues that might be facing the area, the county.
I was making it sound like, something out of Monopoly, chairman of the board. But I should say chairman of the Wood County Board of Supervisors, Lance Pliml, kind enough to join us today. Mr. Chairman, sir, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, that's about the nicest thing I get called. So I really appreciate it and always appreciate the opportunity.
Try to keep it professional.
Come up and talk to you.
And we'll make this sound like professional wrestling, Now entering the studio, the 7-time Wood County Board chairman.
Well, years ago, I had to do it was a business trip to Germany, and one of the things they do in those countries is, I guess, the highest ranking government official from the area has to attend with the business entity to go over there. And while I was in Germany, they kept referring to me as Chancellor of the County Wood. So I thought that was a pretty good title, too. I haven't been able to, adapt that here yet. But
you tried.
It was pretty darn nice when I was over there.
The Chancellor of the county. I kind of like that. Okay. Well, we'll just call you Wood County Board Chair. How's that sound?
You just call me Lance.
How about just Lance? Yeah, there you go. Lance Pliml with us. And even when you weren't chairman of the board, you were on the board and have been for quite some time now, right?
Yeah, I guess I'm pushing a quarter of a century here. I forget how old I am. I started this when my kids were pretty little, asked by the business community, to run for office because we didn't have a lot of people who were involved, as small business people. Then once you get there and you think you're going to serve your 2 terms and maybe head out the door, you constantly get encouraged to run. And as you get involved there, you tend to, chair committees, maybe eventually chair the board. And then I've had the opportunity to chair the Wisconsin Counties Association Board of Directors and serve as their president. So you get, fairly well involved. You get ensconced in county government. You tend to acquire enough knowledge that they keep you around, I guess. And it's been fun. And at the time it ceases to be fun is the time when I will step aside and let that next person decide to run for 2 terms.
Yeah. Or 2+. But so it's pushing a quarter century now. But and I've always said this, in terms of people talk about like term limits, things like that, and sometimes I think, well, why would we want to limit? Why would we want to usher all that experience out the door, especially if you've got someone who's willing to continue serving, right?
I've spoken on this issue many times in many different venues, and I think here's where it comes into play. Politician shouldn't be a profession. And when your income depends on that reelection, then all you tend to do is campaign for reelection. You have to make promises, and in effect, you're beholden to somebody, which tends to, skew some of that decision-making process. At the local level, I'm talking, towns, villages, counties, municipalities, these are not highly paid full-time positions. If you make $1,000 or $2,000 a year for all your time, you're fairly lucky. And in effect, there are term limits. Every 2 years, there's a re-election process, and people can either validate the fact that you've been there and re-elect you, or they can go a different direction. But I will say this, the local official, the guy that isn't making $100,000, $200,000 a year, and to clarify, a lot of people think, for instance, these government elected officials at the local level have health insurance or retirements or other benefits. There are none of those. You basically get $40, maybe $50 to go to a meeting, and that's it. So there are term limits in that effect. And then you're right, that historical perspective really helps. That being blended with those new people that come in with those new ideas. But I think at the end of the day, if you don't have the attitude that I'm going to sit back, listen, and learn, kind of be quiet, hear what the person out there in the community has to say, you probably don't last very long in office anyway.
That's right. Yeah. And you're right. When you do get those fresh set of eyes that come in and see things differently, and that helps too. And And Wood County has had that. You've got some of both. You've got some like yourself and Donna Roser from Marshfield, who's, I think, going into her 11th
Yeah, Donna, I
term
think,
now.
came in about a term after I did, somewhere in that vicinity.
And then you've got, a lot of turnover, too, in some of these areas. Or I should say not a lot of turnover, but you are getting some new people in some of these, from some of the areas of Wood County who are bringing a fresh perspective at the same time. So you got a nice mix, I would say, right now.
Yeah, and that perspective always changes. And having new people, different eyes looking at the problem or the situation always helps. What does the experience part bring to the table? It probably cuts the time frame down in the problem-solving situation. When somebody asks me, what do you bring? What's the most valuable resource you bring to the table? I know who to call, and they'll usually answer the phone.
There you go.
As opposed to when you start and you make 20 phone calls to get to the guy who runs the department at the state or federal level. Usually they'll pick up the phone and talk to you. But that's just a virtue of. I'll back up a little bit here. I'll regress. I often hear new elected officials tell me, I like this because there's some power. There's no power at all. You may develop eventually some influence in the process, but you only develop that through respect and discussion. So if you come in, like a bull in a china shop and you think you're going to run over people, that doesn't work. When you work with people, you collaborate, you cooperate, you compromise. Over time, people realize that whatever side of the aisle, if it's a partisan situation you sit on, that they can have that conversation and you'll sit there and listen and then try to come away with the best solution. Those people tend to stick around and they become very valuable resources, even if they've been in office for many years.
Well, and not only does, you said, like bull in a china shop, not only does that not work, I mean, if you're in it for that kind of a thing, I mean, that's the wrong reason to get into local, public service, right?
Sure, yes. It all comes down to every single person that I've ever met in government, unless they're a single issue person.
Right.
If you ask them what's the overall central idea, it's I want to make the community I live in better.
Yeah.
And then when you delve a little deeper into that question, they may come at it from a different perspective, different angle. They may try to have, they may have different groups where they have influence. They try to get there. But at the end of the day, that's the overriding principle. And if you can sit down and discuss that and get there, it works well. The nice part about, I'll call it local government, is it isn't partisan government. Yeah. You don't run with a D or an R or an I after your name. I mean, you just run for the office. Yeah. And so we tend not to have those arguments where you're so ensconced where you say, I cannot vote for that good idea because it's going to ruffle the feathers of party leaders.
Right.
That never happens.
Right.
So, we bring out maybe a little different perspective to the table.
Well, and if you're, one of those issue candidates like you mentioned, they usually don't last too long either because they get in there and their issue goes away. If it doesn't go their way, especially, they tend to wash out pretty quickly from the whole process as well.
Issue solved, yeah, and
Now
involvement done.
they have no interest, yeah.
And that's the hard part sometimes when you have typically most people run for a board in the first place because something has irritated them.
Right.
That's generally what happens. And that will be the first thing they take up. But you try to identify those people when they first come into service, and you say, where can we redirect that energy? And that focus to other areas that are really important to the community. And those that are successful tend to adapt pretty quickly. And so when we look at, when we interview people, not just in Wood County, but across the state, if I'll put on my counties association hat, and you say, what's the most important issue to people across the state? You might think it's education, transportation, some of those, but in each and every case, it's public safety. The overarching principle is when I walk out of my home, I want to feel safe. And then we get to those other issues a little more on the periphery. I want good roads. I want good communication infrastructure. I want good education for my kids. I like recreational opportunities. And I was on a conference call on the way up here, and one of that was, where is housing going in the future? And business. And one of the things we've identified through this COVID crisis is there's going to be a lot more people that are probably working from home. We're going to see probably a smaller footprint in some of the commercial, venues from an office space perspective. One of the principles we heard there is we want more space. So I think you're going to see a migration from the cities back into the country to some respect. And that should benefit us because, we have all those things, wide open spaces, great education, pretty good transportation across the board, and a safe environment. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing people migrate here from those larger cities, and you're especially seeing it on the East Coast as they're leaving the New Yorks and the New Jerseys, and they're heading to a little bit more rural communities.
Yeah, so come on in. Wood County's open for you.
Yeah, we're open. We would love to have you. Constantly looking at better ways to expand.
Right, and we're finding. I think companies. I said this early on in the COVID pandemic situation that a lot of these companies are going to figure out real quickly that once they were forced into doing things a little differently, they're going to find out quickly that they can operate a lot differently and probably at a lot lower cost than what they were to begin with. And you'll see some things that were the result of COVID probably stick after COVID, whenever that is, because they can do it, for less money.
We're already seeing that happen. As people are working from home, one of the things, and I handed you a report that later you're going to probably look at over the next couple of days that talks about where the spending has occurred, what industries have been most greatly affected. And the ones that have been greatly affected, you would assume, hotels, motels, right. Restaurants, devastated. One of the ones that surprised me is automobile sales down 25%. That one surprised me. Home furnishing sales down. Well, people probably weren't going to some of the furniture stores. Your online shopping, up 66%.
Right.
But building materials were too. And that translates to one of the things we're seeing right now is not just single income families, but dual income families, both partners working from home, and now just not having one office in the house, but we're actually seeing build out where people need two office spaces within a home, so they're not sitting in the living room where the dog's barking or the kids are, while they're actually working at home. So we're seeing a tremendous amount of spending in the building industry, and much of it has actually been in single family, private office home, within those structures. So everything's changing. It's going to be a different dynamic. The pendulum's going to swing back to much closer to where it was than it is right now. But there are going to be changes.
Well, and who knows, maybe a lot of that was not building, but, maybe they had to repair. They got on each other's nerves, and now they got to repair some stuff.
I thought we weren't going to talk about my personal life. But that's...
Yeah, they're not building on an office. They're repairing the one they smashed up because they got on each other's nerves.
Building a wall down the middle of the bedroom.
In the quarantine. Yeah, right.
No, it's...
it's separate beds. Bedrooms. Yeah, a wall right down the middle.
Yeah, and those are other things, that we delve into. You've got, you're trying to balance opening business, with the tremendous unemployment numbers we've had, and at the same time being safe during, the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been the central issue and conversation, everywhere we go. But there are other issues that continue during that time. And, although COVID it can be an extremely devastating, illness, in most people, again, generalities, it's not that devastating, but there's other fallout. You've heard about it. There's the depression issue. There's the suicide issue. There's the child abuse issue. You cram 4 or 5 people into a very small space and you don't give them any opportunity to get out. It creates other issues. So from a government perspective, we're always looking at where do we allocate resources to minimize those impacts in the community. Yeah.
Well, is that what you wanted? What did you want to spend time talking about today? Did you have a specific
golf
agenda? Yeah, right.
Just get out there and
distance. I social distance myself from my golf ball every time I play.
Sometimes
way
not
over there somewhere. I don't know where it went, but
as long as it went somewhere. That's so everything we're doing out there. I never walk into one of these situations with a set bunch of topics that I want to talk about. I kind of like to have the conversation
go with the
where
flow.
It goes. But we are looking at those opportunities that we've had. For instance, in Wood County, for instance, our campgrounds were open before state campgrounds.
Yeah.
We put in place the recommendations of the health officer, which included that stuff that's, come into a common dialogue in the vernacular, social distancing. You never heard that before. But how do we limit impacts in the communal areas? Whether it be showers, bathrooms, some of those. But at the same time, encouraging people to get out, use those campgrounds. personally, I hope our health officer doesn't listen. She might disagree, but I think you can certainly get out and walk. You can certainly go to the beach. You can certainly head to the golf course. Now, some of the pictures I see on some of the beaches, especially if there's, in some cases, another restaurant, bar, or something else associated with, or there's a large party going on, you're not seeing those social distancing guidelines being adhered to. But generally speaking, you need to get out and you need to do something. You cannot sit at home, or you will not be well at the end of this period of time, whenever it ends.
Whenever that, you got that right. Well, and you mentioned, we talked COVID, and now the big concern has to be going into the second half of this year, you are going to start to, the budget process, right? And that's really going to get ramped up here in the next few weeks or months. And, pandemic-related things are probably going to be first and foremost on your list of concerns. And the hit we've taken here, does it impact overall budget? You mentioned the report that I have in front of me. It has to do with sales tax revenues, right, in Wisconsin that are kind of all over the map.
County by county, and from a county's in that report, from a county's perspective, most of the money that we receive in a budget is pass-through dollars. They're federal and state dollars allocated for specific programs. Less than 20% of all the money we have is allocated for, I'll call it, local programs or things that you do within the community. Might be capital improvement projects, parks, roads to some extent, but there's a very small part of that you actually get to use. Those revenues generally come from user fees or property taxes. Yeah. If people are affected to the point where they can't, or our share of sales tax, which right. we have to, if people aren't consuming, if people aren't building, if all of those things, if they're not using our, like I said, our parks, where we derive revenue from user fees, and if people can't pay their property taxes because both have lost their job, it obviously impacts budgets going forward. This will be a challenge. I thought I'm going to jinx myself when I say this. I thought the impact on sales tax to Wood County in the original projections we had was going to be much greater than it is right now. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't tell you what May is going to look like, or June, but I think we've seen an increase in a more normalization of those spending patterns. But to this point, being down 4.4% is not nearly as devastating as I anticipated. So my guess right now is cuts will probably be more in the area of capital improvement than they will be in programs. That's a guess, and like I said, no crystal ball. But
that 4.4%, that's the Wood County number.
That's the Wood County number.
What's the time period?
That we were down 4.4% in March and April. In January and February, we were actually up like 9%.
Wow!
And so, if projections hold true, as bad as this sounds right now, we're going to go back to about the levels we were at in 2016-17. 2016-17 were pretty healthy economies, and I hope that holds true. Now, we don't have that, like I said, that crystal ball where we know, is there, you hear, is there a second wave? I don't know. Will we have a vaccine tomorrow? Probably not tomorrow, but maybe sooner than we think. Or will we have effective treatments? All of that's going to play into this.
Yeah, you're right. The statewide number was 10.5%, the decline in March and April, which, again, I would have expected to be higher. But
yeah, me too. If you look at where the devastation comes in, and this isn't necessarily government coffers, because we get a share, 0.5% of that sales tax comes to Wood County. But the devastation to some of those individual industries within that. So if you say Amazon's up 66% and we derive revenue from some of those sales, well, that's great. But that doesn't help the people, on Main Street, throughout the state of Wisconsin or the county. You look at what's happened to the hotels, restaurants, those types of businesses that, like I mentioned, the furniture stores, car dealers. All you have to do is drive up and down the street here, and you see businesses that are still not operating at 100%. They're going to be affected. And if they don't come back, those employees who used to work there are affected. So although the overall revenue to government off the, originally, I don't think is going to be as devastating as it is to the individual in jobs lost and some of those effects. So our hope in Wood County was we can reopen these as quickly and safely as possible. We can get people back to as normal as they were before, and we can get this economy moving, because that's where the devastation is going to come in.
Right. Do you know, from a budget standpoint, how bad is it for Wood County right now, in terms of maybe a budget hit here, or we use that term budget deficit, for lack of a better term? How bad might it be going into the 2021 budget process?
Yeah, 2020 probably pretty much takes care of itself, because all of that, that revenue is generally on its way. I'm not anticipating huge, aid cuts from either federal or state governments. 2021 is probably going to be a little more difficult, but in every day the message, and the information we get clears things up. It's a lot harder to project in February what 2021 is going to look like than it is in, let's say, August or September. For instance, we've lost considerable revenues in parks, and you think about this personally when you're at home, and believe me, my heart goes out. If there's one group that this goes out to probably more than anybody, it's the high school seniors in our communities. Those opportunities where those people that you went to school with for 12 years, been lifelong friends, you anticipated the rest of your senior year, the proms, the musicals, the graduations, and the sports, all those people that waited for that opportunity to participate, all that was dashed. That to me is absolutely devastating. But so in regard to that, you have cancellations of graduation parties, of anniversaries, weddings to some extent, many of those things. So we're going to see a decrease, for instance, in park revenues. Probably going to see a decrease in forestry revenues. That will be a hit. By the same token, and I'm not saying it's dollar for dollar, there's certainly a savings in transportation cost, in gas, not just because of use, but because of the price of petroleum products. And you think of a sheriff's department or a highway department, we use a lot of product. The cost of oil goes down, so does the cost to pave, generally speaking. So there are some offsetting costs, and the picture will continue to clear itself up.
Which is probably a good thing, because it'll be offset by, there's going to be a big decrease in, let's say gas tax revenues statewide, for instance. That's going to be, and I don't know if that will take a hit in terms of when those revenues then are supposed to get dispersed across the state, county by county, right? Yep. So, maybe that number will look a lot lower next year. So I don't know. Hopefully some of this just all kind of is a wash in the end here.
And the other part is, the federal government keeps handing out money they don't really have. They keep printing it, which again creates other problems on the other end for those individuals out there, especially, for instance, retirees. If you were banking on 5%, 6%, 7% returns on money you had saved your whole life to be able to move in that retirement group, and all of a sudden you're at 1 or 2%, that's a tremendous difference. But they keep printing money. They keep, we've had our, first allocation, second, third. They're talking about a fourth now. The fourth seems to be like it's going to be aimed a little bit more directly to local governments and manufacturing. Is it too little, too late? I don't know. Is it too much? I'm glad that's not a balancing act that I'm working on right now. All I know is I kind of chuckle when I hear him say, we're going to allocate another $4 trillion or $3 trillion. I'm going, you don't have $1 trillion. Right. So, you're changing the monetary supply in the country greatly while you're doing that. Generally speaking, though, I don't think the people in Wood County should panic at this point. I don't think you're going to see, major cuts in programs. We're working on our employees, in their, I'll call it, wages, benefits, all those. I think those remain, generally constant. I think that employment in the county has been generally, we've had a fairly diverse community as far as, manufacturing and jobs. We just took a huge hit, though, down in Wisconsin Rapids with the Verso announcement.
Right.
And that isn't clear. Is this an idle for 2 months and open the doors? Some of this is also pandemic related. They're saying orders are down, 30+%. I don't know, and then my knowledge of the paper industry is logs go in this side of the factory and paper comes out this side. And so the questions we ask of, or I ask of that management of that company is, A, can you make a different kind of product. And I'm being ridiculous when I say things like this, but can we produce the paper and product used in PPE, in gowns, in masks? I don't know. Can we make a paperboard product, with the machines that we have? You look at Amazon, the price right now for recycled cardboard is higher than that of metals. Right. Can we convert to that? So the first question is, A, can we? Because I don't know the paper science part of it. And then B, if you can, what's the cost to do it? Because that obviously plays into the whole deal.
Right.
But when you look at 900 plus jobs directly in Rapids, and then you look at the ancillary effect, all those suppliers that provide to those mills, I'm guessing that that's multiplied by at least 2. And then what will that effect be? So that probably doesn't affect 2020 to any great extent. It will become a clear picture for 2021. I don't think it's going to be rosy, but I also don't think it's going to be as devastating as some of the news that you hear out there at a national level.
Yeah. Well, we hope not. Does something like that, the Verso announcement with that, does that have an impact on the county in terms of revenue or anything what is the impact of something like that on, let's say, Wood County? It's a huge impact, and where it becomes a huge impact is the buying power of those people that work there. The ability for them. Think if you had a 2-income family and both of them worked there, and those are high-paying jobs. The ability to remain in your home, to pay property taxes, the things that you would have bought. There's some staples that you obviously will continue, but the discretionary spending, those big ticket items, that disappears, that share of sales tax. And then, the bigger picture long term is, do those people remain in the community? And our hope is yes. When we had the news, years ago at the Port Edwards Mill, the rapid response teams came in, you retrain, other industries have flourished. And the question is, can we keep them in the county? Are there other businesses that we can open? Can we reopen that one? Can they be retrained to work in, you look at some of the fabrication we do in Marshfield, which is fabulous. You look at the medical community, and those needs continue to rise. Can we retrain some of those people to go into those fields? So there's some uncertainty, but that's a huge impact. And the repercussions, if we can't get that mill open again in some capacity, is going to be extremely difficult to deal with over the next several years. It's an announcement some called it a gut punch. I think that's what Scott Krug told me.
Yeah, I think that's what Scott said, his exact words.
Punch in the gut, and it really is, and you feel it up here even. You feel for those people, those families, that economy, and you go, wow, that is the last bit of news we needed, especially during a pandemic.
Well, and you look at Marshfield. If you said to me, what is Marshfield most noted for? World-class medical care.
Yeah.
But if you took and shut down the Marshfield Clinic,
right?
You can't imagine how devastating that would be to Marshfield. Now, a lot of those people that work at that facility, who had employer-provided health insurance, who get their medical care at the Marshfield Clinic, who no longer may go to the Marshfield Clinic, that impacts the number of employees that they have there, the number of providers. And so, so our hope, and, with the leadership, Senator Tessin, certainly Representative Krug directly down there, but our other representatives here, I know, Representative Spiros and Culp and Vandermeer, they're all obviously concerned because those people don't necessarily live right in Wisconsin Rapids. Yeah. They live in the region. Is getting some answers, getting this plant back open in some capacity, whether it be Verso ownership or another company. It's kind of hard for me to believe that you can just that amount of equipment and capital at a cost that's advantageous that's more advantageous to operating it in some respect. That's a knock on wood. Yeah. Hope that happens, but that's a gut punch was probably a good word. Right. Yeah, and on top of the COVID thing that we're dealing with everywhere, it wasn't easy because the economy was just, we were really on the upswing.
Oh yeah, it was just humming right along, and all of a sudden, a lot of things just came to a screeching halt here. And now this, and that's the last thing we needed, announcements like that. But we've seen other examples of that on a much smaller scale. This plant is shutting down or idling or whatever because of COVID, or now we can't do that. It's just there have been a lot of smaller examples, but that was a major one that. we all, I don't know, feared might happen someday, and then our worst nightmare came true, basically.
Yeah, and that's the importance, and one of the things we talk about all the time is diversification of industry.
Yeah, right.
And how do we build out? And a really good example in it. I'm going to get away from the environmental side of this, but we had people when frac sand was one of those industries that came to Marshfield, with some of the processors, and people, some people said, well, it won't be here forever, and I would say there's nothing that's here forever,
right.
And if we can garner some, economic good from businesses, even if they exist for, 5, 10, 20 years, that benefits the area. I mean, who would have thought IBM wasn't going to make typewriters one day? Who would have thought we'd all be walking around? I did not expect to be walking around with an Apple or a Samsung device in my pocket, and that's not an endorsement of any two companies. But you do.
Right. Yeah.
You look at the revenues that have gone to companies that provide electronic means of meetings. Zoom, WebEx, Teams. Their revenues are through the roof. Wish I would have known. I would have certainly participated in, in buying those companies.
Right.
You look at a stock market that's down a little bit, but it's still amazingly up from where it was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So although we've taken, a slight hit here in the last few months, if you've been in the market since 2000, well, I'll even go way back, but even since 2000, let's say 16 to now, it's a phenomenal increase. If I go all the way back to that 2011 time, I mean, you've doubled your money.
Yeah, post-recession.
Yeah, post-recession. Now, there's risk obviously involved, and there's risk in everything we do. And so from a government perspective, we try to ascertain where that is, minimize it, and then, make the best decisions you can. And that's to what you said earlier. New eyes on problems, different ways of looking at things. My favorite people in meetings are those that, there's two of them. The one that asks the question I can't answer, and I say, well, let me go back and talk to some people because I can't answer that. But maybe even the one that's even more important is the one that not only asks the question I couldn't answer, but asks the question I didn't even think of asking. And that's typically where innovation comes from. And those are the people that amaze me. Have you ever thought of? And I'm going, not only can I answer it, I didn't think of that. Right. And oftentimes, that is, what the future holds and where we end up with our best solutions.
All right, Lance Pliml, the Wood County Board Chairman, on our Insight program today. 10:39, glad you're with us, and stay tuned. We've got more of the Insight program after this. If you have a question or concern for the Wood County Board Chairman, feel free to join our discussion. 384-2191 on the Insight program on WDLB.
Are you looking for the highest quality grilling meats? Look no further. Hewitt's Meats award-winning meats. Get your favorite cuts of meats, including steaks, ribs, and fresh ground beef. Choose from 51 different flavored brats, or try them all. Hewitt's Meats, from the kitchen, offers a daily lunch menu, including fresh-made hamburgers, salads, and soup of the day. While you're there, get Hewitt's own hot dogs, made with only real cuts of meat. No fillers. Hewitt's Meats, South Central Avenue and Downwind Drive, Marshfield.
Save big money on garage essentials with 11% off everything now at Menards. Keep your home, car, or truck clean with a 1.5-gallon shop vac. It features a 2-peak horsepower motor that tackles tough messes, wet or dry. Just $26.69 after 11% off. Prices are good through Saturday, June 20th. Savings are a mail-in rebate. Some exclusions apply. See store for details. Start saving with 11% off everything now at Menards.
Save big money at Menards.
We are your CBD store, but to our customers, we're so much more.
Your feel-good store.
Your Fresh Start store.
Your Back to Living store.
Your Storms Don't Scare Us store.
Your It's About Time store.
Despite everything that's going on in the world right now, we are still here for you. We're your CBD store. Because the world of CBD is filled with great stories. Create your story by stopping by your CBD store for a sample and speak to the neighbors who care. We provide award-winning wholesome hemp products that utilize natural plant synergies. We have the expertise to consult, educate, and recommend what is best for you. Your CBD store is located in Marshfield and Wisconsin Rapids. We are your CBD store, but to our customers, we are so much more.
Your I'm Back store.
Your best decision ever store.
Your chilled out Chihuahua store.
Your I Fear No presentation store.
Your comfortable in your own skin store.
Your CBD store.
The Insight program for a Friday morning. Yeah, we made it to Friday, June 19th, 2020 on the Insight program today. Mike Warren in for Jeff Cannon. And Lance Pliml, the Wood County Board Chairman, is with us on the program today. And thank you for being here. We always appreciate it. Keeping us updated on county issues. What is the, what is the biggest priority right now facing Wood County? Is it a lot of what we've been talking about, or is it something that isn't on typically the general public's radar even, or something we wouldn't notice?
No, I probably believe it's what everybody's talking about there, everywhere out there,
Right.
Again, the number one issue that the calls I get generally have been related to public safety. And some of it's been related to, protests. What will Wood County, what will the local law enforcement people do should we have a problem? And the answer is, I hope the people up here are educated enough that we don't have, protests don't bother me, rioting does. Damage to property bothers me, peaceful demonstration does not. And I think our local law enforcement agencies have done a phenomenal job in engaging. Give you an example, we had a very small group in front of the courthouse one day. And I happened to walk out, and I recognized a number of the people when I walked out. And one of them said to me something along the lines of, "Are you going to join us?" And I said, "Well, why? What's our problem?" And one of them said to me, I said, "Have you ever had a problem with our local law enforcement?" And they said, "Well, no." I said, "Have you ever had a problem with our district attorney?" And they said, "No." I said, "Well, would you like to go inside and talk to either one of them?" No. And so
what are you out here for?
So sometimes I'm not sure where
it's the popular thing to do at the time. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and some of the tragedy that we've seen on the news is tragic. And some of those things should never, ever happen or occur. And we have to be cognizant of those things. But, let me go to law enforcement in our area. We don't have, you go to some of these large cities, and generally speaking, that's where most of the problems have arisen. A lot of those cities have, a police academy. You get out of high school, you go to the academy, they pin a badge on you, and you're out on the street. I think I can say almost without exception that we don't have a law enforcement officer, in our area that isn't, college educated with a degree in criminal justice or some other area. Many of them have master's degrees. They're typically not 18 years old and hired out of high school. There's some life experience. And then you hope that education, that level of civility, and the training that we provide, we will never face those situations. That part of it, obviously that concerns me going forward when you've seen some of the unrest, in some of the areas. I think we'll cover that. The COVID issue, that one concerns me. And I'm going to say thanks to facilities, like Marshfield, the clinic, the hospital, Ascension, Aspirus. I'm going to leave some out that are in the area. We have tremendous medical care. So should something occur, I think we have the ability to deal with most of that. Tax revenues going forward, it's going to be an issue out probably 2021, maybe mid-2021. Again, we're mostly relying on state and federal dollars. We'll see where that goes. Right now, they're printing money, like I said, that they don't have. That's going to obviously change, affect the national debt, which then typically affects tax rates and other things from an income tax perspective. Those concern me. From a county's perspective, what's the biggest single issue we're dealing with right now? It may be in the future, I don't even want to say the need, but the discussion on the need for a jail.
Yeah, I knew you were going there. We've been talking about that for most of the time you've been on the county board.
Yeah, it's a huge expense. Yeah. I mean, you can pick your number. I don't want to like throw them out there. 40, 50, 60, 70 million. And
to put that in perspective, the Wood County budget on an annual basis is what, 50 million?
Well, the budget's about 110 million, but about 20 million of that is discretionary spending. So
how much comes from taxpayers?
Well, I say about 20 million of that roughly. So about less than 20% is used for discretionary spending. So you say, do I allocate that to bricks and mortar, or do I allocate that to to mental health, to better education, to some of those other areas? The other part of that is there was a study done recently. I'm going back a couple months, but met with Governor Evers and his Secretary of Corrections. I believe it's Kevin Carr. I'm not I think that's his first name, Secretary Carr. Somewhat similar to Wisconsin in makeup to some extent. It's got a lot of rural areas, a couple big cities, but generally speaking, somewhat similar landscape. We have about 5 times as many people incarcerated as does Minnesota. Now, that does not lend well to my conversation right now when you're looking at some of the unrest that they've had in Minnesota. But generally speaking, you say, before this happened, why do we have 5 times as many people incarcerated? Do they use, is it different sentencing guidelines? Is it electronic monitoring? Do they have more people out on work release? I don't know the answer, and I'm not advocating for that. But when we hear numbers like that, we say, maybe we should look. If we have 100,000 people across the state incarcerated and they have 20, are there better ways to use space and resources than to put up buildings? The governor, and the reason I mentioned the governor and the secretary, they said at that time, and frankly, I chuckled a little bit when they said it. They said they're going to reduce the population of incarcerated people by 40%. And I went, yeah, good luck. I'm not sure how you do that.
Which they have not.
They haven't. And I don't know that.
And there was a protest about that yesterday, in fact.
Yeah. And I don't know that that's even possible.
Right.
And I don't know locally, if we looked at it, if we could even make, a 10% difference or 20. But let's say that happened.
Right.
If that happened and it freed up all that space in all those other jails and all the state prisons, and you could take those longer term jail sentences, those that go 6 to 12 months, and you had the ability to put them into situations that were normally used for state prisoners because they're going to be there for 6 to 12 months. We don't have the transportation issues. Maybe it resolves itself. So,
and then you don't need to build a new jail.
You don't need to build something like that. You can allocate those resources in places that might make more of a difference going forward.
Well, and Sean Becker is working on that. He's talked, they have this program. He's talked to the judges, these nonviolent, can we do more electronic monitoring? We have to now anyway, because we got to create space, social distance space, in case there's a COVID case in the jail. But B, I asked him on this program, and he said, these are changes we're going to make now because of COVID that hopefully will become long-term solutions that stick because they just make sense. Like he says, somebody who doesn't pay a fine shouldn't go to jail. The punishment is not, jail. It's that they didn't, it's the fine that they didn't pay. Get them out there working so they can pay the doggone fine and get them out of jail.
We're extremely lucky, and this is somewhat generational in the way things have transpired over the years. We have 3 very good judges in Wood County, open to suggestion. We have a sheriff that works cooperatively, with those judges. Now, I've been around long enough where not only in our county, but across the state, that just doesn't happen. Right. I mean, we got counties across the state where judges don't talk to sheriffs, sheriffs don't talk to judges. Corp counsels are suing sheriffs.
You're not going to tell me how to do my job.
And I think the realization that none of those operate in a silo is something that is
brilliant.
Is happened, and so those conversations continue. So I'm not here saying we do or we don't need, but I'm saying before you decide to spend that kind of dollars and basically saddle generations with that debt. We really have to look at all of the options available out there. We have to look at what the state's doing, what the federal government's doing, and then make those best decisions. So it's real easy to say, always, let's build a brand new, great, shiny building and it's going to solve the problem. But at the end of the day, if the great big shiny building isn't utilized, like we talked about earlier with even commercial real estate space, and and I am a real estate broker.
Exactly.
When we see, when we see that space being vacated, do we have other options? And and the county did a tremendous job years ago. We looked again expenditure in the tens of millions of dollars to do an expansion to the courthouse, tens of millions, and at a fraction of the cost that we bought the River Block building, which was previously one of the paper company's office buildings, and when they moved all that staff out of state, we purchased that for a tenth of the cost of what we would have done. Basically paid for all practical purposes, paid cash for it, and we have adequate space as far out into the future as I can possibly see.
Yeah, you didn't have to knock a wall out at the courthouse and do this major project.
No, and we had, and I'll mention, there are a number of people involved in the process once it got started. But, we had a supervisor, and, Bill Clendenning met with some of the people. Bill brought myself and some other people into that conversation along the way where we met with those people. We had a committee together. You mentioned Donna Rosa earlier. I think Donna may have chaired that committee going back there, that Space Needs Committee.
Yeah.
And we came up with a really good alternative solution.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm looking at here. So it isn't we shouldn't. It's let's just go in eyes wide open.
Yeah.
And that's just not with jails. That's when we're dealing with, with office space. Where do we go? How do we use it? Is it the best use of all of the equipment that we have in the county? Whether it be our parks, our sheriff's departments, our human services, the facilities that we run up at, formerly known as Norwood, the Northwood County Annex. I can't remember the number.
I can't.
The name always, although we have a restaurant in Rapids that I still refer to by the name it was, I think, 3 owners ago.
Oh, wow.
But once something is branded, it tends to stay there.
Yeah,
but,
right.
How do we use the nursing facility we have down at Edgewater Haven?
Yep.
What else can we put in there to drive revenue? All of those things are conversations that go on every day, because as you put those puzzle pieces together, as we talked budget earlier, every department, and they should, thinks whatever they're doing is the most important thing out there.
Exactly.
And they should. Those department heads should advocate that way. But when we get all of those pieces together and we got that box, that puzzle where the pieces are just laying there, and you start to put it together, you realize that although it's extremely important in that one place, when we look at the county overall, it may not be as important. So that clarity continues, as the year goes on. And that's why hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah. But that's, like you said, some of these problems hopefully just kind of tend to work themselves out if you just, pump the brakes a little bit and get everyone involved in a conversation.
Yeah, people sometimes say government goes slow. And I say oftentimes there's a reason for that.
It's supposed to go slow,
There's
right?
times where you need to be reactive and you need to do something right away. Because, if the dam is failing, you better fix the dam, or we got a problem downstream.
Yeah.
But a lot of this stuff, by the time you engage the different partners in that conversation, you come up with a much better solution at the end of the day.
Yeah. We're running out of time. Anything else? What else is on the agenda for, I'm just thinking now, Wood County Board meets, what, is it still the third Tuesday of the month?
Yeah, third Tuesday of every month.
So you guys just met this week?
We met this week, with the exception of November, state mandated. That's the second Tuesday. That's where we have our budget hearings every year.
Okay.
The public hearing, and then we set the budget, unless that happens to fall on Veterans Day, and then there's a change there too. But generally speaking, third Tuesdays. So
was there, what's the big hot topic right now on the agenda? Anything pressing, or is it just all COVID related and how we're reacting or responding?
Yeah, that has certainly driven the conversation, and a lot of things have gone to the back burner, because of that. Things that. So we still aren't. Although we are meeting in person, and we have always met in person. We have put in place declarations which allow us to meet electronically. If a member of the board, and I'm going to tell the public that too. If you feel safer in that, if you feel safer masking, or if you're going to be in close contact with somebody, probably a good idea. But ways to sanitize, ways to distance, use your head. If you're in one of those vulnerable populations, safer at home is not an order, but it's true. You're safer at home, and then you have to assess your own level of, risk and where you want to be in that. And then, move forward. But
at least now people and businesses get to make that choice.
Make the choice. And that's, that's what it's all about.
I mean, the one-size-fits-all thing, a lot of people had a problem with it because we saw, a lot of areas like Wood County, not a major problem.
Nope. And there comes the blame game. I've heard every governor tell me the president is not going to tell me what to do. Until they have a problem and they can't handle it, then they go, the president's not telling me what to do. And then we go to the next issue. Yeah. And so same thing happens with the counties and states and local municipalities. But make the decision based on the knowledge that you've acquired and at your own level of comfort. That would be my guidance.
Yeah, the president's not going to tell me what to do, and then COVID comes along, and we haven't had any guidance from the president, so I guess we just, we got to do what we think is best for the entire state. And when it's not the best for the entire state, but only best for the areas of the state that hold 2/3 of our population, that leaves the rest of us sort of wondering, what's all the hubbub about here, Gov? It kind of leaves you scratching your head in many cases.
Well, Mike, we're probably out of time, but zoning's one of those issues. I don't want to be zoned. You cannot tell me what to do. And then the neighbor does something different, and they're knocking on the door at the courthouse going, why haven't we been zoned? I'm going, you're the ones who told us you didn't want to be zoned.
Smart growth. Oh, let's not go down that road, shall we not? Okay, well, Lance, always great to talk to you. Just always a lot of information. It goes way too fast, but the perspective that I think Wood County we should kind of feel fortunate to have you because of the whole tie-in with the Wisconsin Counties Association. And so you're bringing these statewide, you're involved, at the state level in a lot of these conversations, which I can only imagine is going to benefit Wood County, if not directly, then indirectly, right?
Yeah, it's certainly helpful. I get to have those conversations at the state level. I get to Washington, been to the White House a few times. You get to have those conversations, and that is helpful. And I'll say this, though. All of our board supervisors, all of our department heads have the opportunity to sit on steering committees, which basically set the platform for county government. And I have tremendous participation from those people, and I encourage their participation, and I've never denied the ability to them to participate.
Right, it's not the Lance show. We got good people,
we need everybody.
We got good department heads, I think, for the most part. And that working as a team, that helps the whole kind of machine work like it's supposed to. So.
That's the theme. You don't get to sit in here and run this whole show yourself without a whole bunch of people making things work.
Yeah, right. I need some help in here.
So I appreciate it, Mike.
Thanks, Lance, as always. We appreciate the time. You'll be back next month?
If you'll have me.
Oh, gosh, yes. The door is always open. Because it broke years ago and we can't get it to shut. That's why. No. Okay. Lance Pliml, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Lance Pliml, Wood County Board Chairman on our Insight program here today for a Friday, June 19th. And thank you for listening. We want to thank Lance for coming up and taking time to share with us his thoughts on Wood County government. New program back Monday morning at 10 a.m. right here on AM 1450 WDLB and also WDLBAM.com. Low 80s already. What is it? Let me double check.